Meeting of House Elections, Constitutional Amendments, Intergovernmental Affairs Committee is called to order. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Representative Branscombe.
Here.
Representative Decker.
Present.
Representative Gooch. Here. Representative Herron. Here. Representative Hodgson.
Here.
Representative Imes.
Here.
Representative Cook.
Here.
Representative Derek Lewis. Representative Scott Lewis.
Here.
Representative Moser.
Here.
Representative Raymond. Here. Representative Swan.
Here.
Representative Weber.
Here.
Representative Callaway.
Here.
Representative Bratcher.
Here. Everyone, please silence your phone, and when you speak, make sure that the green light is on your microphone. And I know we were going to have some bills today, but we don't, so they're still in the sausage making process. Does anybody have guests today? Representative Branscombe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do. I have Russell County's Educators Rising Group with me today. There's some high school students and some of our future educators. They've come up today to take part in the legislative process and have been in committee meetings this morning. I believe you guys got up at, what time was it? 3 o'clock this morning
Wow.
to get here. So,
Could you all stand?
yeah, let's make them feel welcome. Thank you,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you guys for coming. That's great. Representative Cook.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got Paris Independent Schools and Bourbon County FFA. They come up here together every year on the same bus. You know, we talk about getting along. They're doing it in Bourbon County. They're setting the example. They did not get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to get here. I can promise you that. But my favorite day, the FFA chapters come up here. They're going to the old Capitol today. They're going to a committee meeting. Joe Fritch is actually going to play my old Kentucky home on the floor this afternoon. So we have a really big day, and a lot of them parliamentary procedure team. So if they could stand up, and then including one of them, very special, is my daughter out there, Taylor.
All right.
So Taylor, give a wave so everybody can see. Thank you all very much.
Thank you guys. Always look sharp in your uniform there. Thank you for coming. Representative Weber.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to recognize Joanne Ray here today. Joanne is my guest here today. She's a registered nurse with Norton Hospital. She is shadowing me today as part of their leadership advocacy training program to have individuals in the nursing field spend a day with a state legislator. That happened last week with another individual so that they can learn the legislative process, know what it's like to spend the day in the life of a member of the General Assembly, so that as they advocate for their profession, they better understand the role that we perform here in Frankfort. So I'd like to ask the members of the committee to make Joanne welcome. Thank
you, Joanne. Thank you. We love Norton's in Louisville. You know that. So anybody else? Representative Callaway.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate all of you being here today. Some of you may or may not know that a little over a week ago I had to have a spinal fusion, and I am here today because my wife has been with me every step of the way over the last couple weeks, and so I want to recognize her, and I want y'all to be able to meet her today. My wife, Angela Callaway. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Angela. And thank you, guys. So, anybody else? First item today, and the only item today, will be the State Board of Elections. And come forward, please. And they're going to give a presentation. And we look forward to it. And take it away once you identify yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Karen Sellers, Executive Director of the State Board of Elections.
And I'm Richard House, the Assistant Director of the State Board of Elections.
I just want to thank the committee that we really appreciate the opportunity. The chairman asked us to come and speak about ERIC, which is the Electronic Registration Information Center. I also want to thank the committee and the chairman for allowing via Zoom the executive director of ERIC, Shane Hamlin, and Jennifer Morrell, who will be on a little bit later to speak or add to Richard's report about our RLA pilot that we did. They have a lot of expertise in these areas, and just felt it was important that both of them were available to the committee. And I will introduce Shane Hamlin. He is on Zoom. He is the executive director of ERIC, and he can summarize Kentucky's membership in ERIC and about what we do under this membership agreement that we have with ERIC. And I will
Thank you.
turn
Are
it
you
over
there?
to Shane.
Are you there, Shane?
I am.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Great. I will share my screen. And while I'm doing that, I'd like to thank the chair and the vice chair and Karen for inviting me today to share information on ERIC and what we do and how Kentucky makes use of their ERIC membership. It's a pleasure to be before you this morning from 7 a.m. my time out in Washington State. So I look forward to sharing information and answering any questions that you may have. As I move through I thought I'd pop on camera so you can see who's speaking, but as I move through the presentation, I'll come off camera and then I'm happy to hop back on during any Q&A if that's okay with the chair.
Yes, thank you.
Great. Okay. So ERIC obviously helps states with list maintenance, as I'm sure you've heard from Karen in previous hearings. And there are a couple of really important challenges to understand when thinking about good list maintenance. Maintaining accurate voter rolls is a challenge because every day voters move or die. And then the voters who move don't always remember to update their registration. They don't always immediately go in and renew at a driver's license or update their address at a DMV office either. And you can see on this slide just two really high level stats that I think support this quite well. About 27 million people, or a little over 8% of the population, moved in 2021, according to the Census Bureau. And pre-COVID move rates were even higher. And then a little over 3.5 million Americans died in 2021, the most recent year in which official death estimates are available. So there really is a high mobility, and then you have deaths, and then you have other life events that make it a challenge to keep your voter rolls up to date and accurate. And just as a simple analogy to that, imagine, and you probably all understand the challenges of keeping your own mailing list up to date as people move and contact information changes. So what is ERIC's mission then, given these challenges? We help state and local officials improve the accuracy of their voter rolls and register more eligible citizens in the voting process. And we believe ERIC is the most effective tool available to help election officials maintain the integrity of their voter rolls. When ERIC was founded in 2012 by 7 states, and I'll get to that in a second, those states really insisted on a balanced approach in its mission, both to improve the ability to maintain accurate voter rolls while also providing access to voter registration for eligible citizens. Really essentially a balance between accuracy and access, and you'll see that throughout the presentation. ERIC currently has 33 members. They're here on the map in the darker blue. You may have heard that Alabama has withdrawn from ERIC, and that is true. Their membership resignation will be effective in April. So they are included here in this map, and then we'll be down to 32 members. But we are talking to several other states that are interested in joining. So membership this year could flex a little bit throughout the year. So some basics about ERIC. We are a nonprofit membership organization, as I said, founded in 2012 by 7 states. 4 of those were led by Republicans, 3 by Democrats. Today, ERIC is led by a bipartisan mix of Republican and Democratic state election officials across 32 states and the District of Columbia. By the way, those founding states were Washington, Utah, Virginia, Colorado, Nevada, Maryland, and Delaware. So participating states control ERIC. The states that make up its membership govern the organization and fund it. Each chief election official across the membership appoints a member representative to serve on the board of directors. For your state, Executive Director Karen Sellers serves on the ERIC board of directors. The state board administers your state's involvement in ERIC. They submit the required data and process the reports that they receive. ERIC is funded by participating states. New members pay a one-time fee and then pay annual dues. Initial startup support did come from the Pew Charitable Trust, but there were no other funding sources involved in ERIC, and there never have been any other funding sources involved in ERIC. We are supported by our members through dues payments. So how does ERIC work? Well, step one is states submit on a regular routine basis certain data that we then use to provide reports, and I'll get to those reports in a moment, but they provide voter registration and DMV data. And you can see in the green box on the left, the voter registration data, full name, a mailing and residential address, date of birth, last four of the Social Security, and then something we call an activity date. That helps us determine which record is more recent, thereby indicating that perhaps an update is needed for the record. I will talk in a moment about how we secure the date of birth, how the members secure the date of birth and the Social Security before they send it to us. But all these data fields are needed in order to compare against data from the DMV file and the Social Security file in order to identify deceased voters and voters who appear to have moved. From the DMV, same full name, mailing and residential address, driver's license and ID, a date of birth, a Social Security number, last four digits typically, and again, an activity date so that we can compare changes in those records and know which record might be most recent. And then we also maintain and are qualified recipient of the Social Security Limited Master Death File. This is a process that you have to apply for and you have to undergo every 3 years, an independent assessment of your handling of the data to ensure that you're complying with federal data laws pertaining to that data. And we have undergone that assessment twice, and we're about to do it again in 2023. This data set provides us with full names, date of birth, Social Security number, and date of death. And that is used to produce the deceased voter report, which I will get to in a moment. So in these data sets, we ask the states, our members, to exclude confidential records. So if your state, for example, has a program that allows victims of domestic violence, in some states it includes victims of domestic violence or stalking, or perhaps judges or others, their voter registration information, if it is confidential, it is not public, we do not want those records because we don't want to take any risk on exposing those individuals or having those records submitted or sent to other ERIC states as part of the cross-state match report that I will highlight in a moment. We also don't get party affiliation. Party affiliation is unnecessary to the matching process. We don't need it and we don't ask for it. So we do not know whether a voter is a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent. It is not necessary for our work in helping states maintain accurate voter rolls. We ask states to exclude known non-citizens. And this is for two reasons. One, we do not want to send back a known non-citizen in a report that will be used to reach out to individuals to provide them with voter registration information, because we don't want our members, and ERIC as an organization does not want to send an invitation to register to vote to someone we know is not a US citizen. Also, non-citizen data that may be contained in a state motor vehicle database can sometimes be unreliable because non-citizens may typically be moving through the process to become citizens, and their status may change over time. So we have found that it's unreliable, and rather than risk misidentifying someone as a non-citizen, which could lead to litigation or other legal challenges, we simply do not, we ask states to exclude that data. And then they follow their own processes for managing and filtering out and protecting against non-citizens registering to vote, or how they may be handled in the list maintenance process. And in that final bullet in the gray box, I will briefly describe this process, and then if necessary, I can send a slide to sort of give you an example of what this looks like. But states protect the date of birth, the Social Security number, and the driver's license number by applying what we call a cryptographic hash to those data fields. And a cryptographic hash is essentially, it's different from encryption. Cryptographic hash, all our members use the same software to do this, so that when they hash their dates of birth, for example, of March 9th, 1974, it will come out of that process, that algorithm, with the same value so that they can still be compared and matched. It's a string of roughly 42 characters, letters and numbers that can still be compared, but it's not readable to the human eye. It will make no sense to a human who sees it. Cryptographic hashes are not intended to be decrypted, so there's no key to decrypt it. It's sort of like making sausage. Once you turn the pig into sausage, there's not really going, there's no way going back to the original, to the pig, if you will. It's a little bit crude, but it is a decent analogy of how cryptographic hashing works. So the states, our members, submit these data sets on a routine basis, and then we receive the Social Security death data on a monthly basis, and we produce a variety of reports for their use. On the left, we have the eligible but unregistered report. This identifies individuals who do not appear to be registered to vote, but may be eligible. In the center, we have 4 list maintenance reports. In-state movers, these are individuals who've moved within the state but have not updated their address. This may also include updates to contact information like phone numbers and email if the state collects it and if they want it. This also includes, we have the cross-state movers report in here. These are individuals who've moved from Kentucky to another ERIC member state. Deceased voters and in-state duplicates. In-state duplicates are duplicate registrations within the state. We have 2 optional reports, a national change of address. This is a report provided using official USPS data. We are also a certified service provider of these data, and we provide these reports as needed or as requested by our members. It is not a report that is required to be used. And then we also have what we call a voter participation report. This is a report that identifies possible cases of double voting or illegal voting after each federal general election. It also identifies cases where it appears someone may have voted on behalf of a deceased individual. I'll talk a little bit more about how these reports are created as I work through the next few slides. I'm going to start with just a few key points on that eligible but unregistered report. So these reports come directly from ERIC, not any other data sources or any other entity. They contain individuals who have a driver's license or ID card, but who are not registered to vote. This is a relatively simple comparison of your DMV record to your voter roll, and anyone who is not on the voter roll but has a DMV record is identified in this report. ERIC, our organization, cannot see the age of these individuals because, as I said, those dates of birth are hashed before it's submitted to ERIC. The state then processes these reports, and I'll get to that in a second. So the data in these reports comes directly from the DMV, and therefore these data are protected by the Federal Driver's Privacy Protection Act of 1993. They're not disclosable. The states can share these data with ERIC because we qualify under one of the exceptions authorized in that federal law. As I said before, there are no political party affiliation in these reports, so there's no way to target these mailings to either Democrats, independents, Republicans, or what have you. States take these reports and filter out any individuals they know not to be eligible. For example, if they have access to official data on felon status, they can remove known felons who are ineligible. They can compare these records to the original DMV to look at the age and ensure that only individuals who should be receiving this based on age eligibility receive this mailing. And then these mailings, all these mailings across all of the ERIC members clearly state the eligibility requirements, and reminding the recipient of these mailings, and these are typically postcards, of the age, citizenship, residency, and any other eligibility requirements, as well as information on how to register. And these are typically done prior to each federal general election every other year. That is the minimum requirement. Moving into list maintenance. List maintenance reports are required. These are a required element of membership in ERIC, and I know that there is some misunderstanding out there on this. And in fact, actually here you can see this is verbatim from our membership agreement, that when they receive credible data from ERIC indicating that information in a record is out of date or inaccurate, the member shall, at a minimum, initiate contact with that voter in order to correct the inaccuracy or obtain information sufficient to inactivate or update the voter's record. And essentially they do this under the NVRA, under the National Voter Registration Act, or under their state voter registration list maintenance laws. The list maintenance reports are here for you, and I want to just briefly walk through how those are created and some of the requirements around those reports and how states use them. So that cross-state movers report that identifies Kentucky voters who've maybe moved up to Ohio, moved somewhere else, this is created by comparing your voter rolls to other states' DMV and voter rolls. And where there is a newer more recent voter or licensing record in another state, those individuals will be included on this report. In-state updates, very simple, and I called them in-state movers earlier. They're the one and the same. These are where we compare your voter roll to your DMV record, and where the DMV record indicates a newer address or contact information, those individuals are included in that report. And then the deceased report is a simple match of the Social Security death master list to your state voter rolls. And again, individuals who appear on the Social Security death index and the voter file are included in this report. The difference between the Social Security death master and maybe deceased data that the state board is already receiving is typically states internally receive death notices or death data from their state vital records agency. And this would capture and include deaths that occur within the state. The Social Security death master file includes deaths for your residents that occur outside of the state. And then in-state duplicates is a pretty straightforward report that identifies potential or all duplicates within your state, and states that have sort of bottom-up architected voter registration systems, or where the counties or local jurisdictions are primarily responsible for the transfer of voter registrations and maintaining voter records. Those states tend to have more in-state duplicates. These are not necessarily an indication of potential, problems within the database. These are just, it's common in bottom-up systems that a sort of older record will exist for a while as the transfers occur, and we help identify those so they can clean them up. So within the ERIC requirements right now, states must request at least one of these reports, no more than every 425 days, but they are strongly encouraged to request and act on all of these reports at least once a year. And I'm pleased to say that all of the ERIC members use these reports more frequently than the bare minimum. They are all exceeding sort of the floor, if you will, of what's required. They have to certify back to ERIC, really to them, to their colleagues in ERIC, to show sort of accountability that they have initiated contact and acted on these reports, that they've initiated contact with at least 95% of the individuals. And that 95% is there to give them a little bit of room because they have access to information to indicate that perhaps someone hasn't moved and so forth. So it's important to give them a little bit of flexibility to identify sort of nuisance records and not act on those. When they are acting on a cross-state and in-state, they generally need to follow the NVRA or state list maintenance laws. ERIC doesn't tell them what to do exactly. We just tell them they need to do something with that information to improve the accuracy of their voter rolls. And so that may be sending a postcard to the old address and act on deliverables. That may be sending a voluntary cancellation request to a new address, which is fairly common for that cross-state report where they're contacting someone out of state and asking them to cancel their registration. And so generally just following the NVRA and doing good list maintenance with these reports. And I am almost done. The next slide just summarizes Kentucky's use of the list maintenance reports over its membership since 2019. So as you can see, the state board has requested and used 2 cross-state movers reports identifying almost 370,000 individuals, Kentuckians, who've moved out of state, 42,000 in-state updates, 11,000 deceased voters across 3 reports, and a little over 10,000 duplicate registrations across 3 reports, for a total of about 432,000 out-of-date or inaccurate records identified as part of your membership in ERIC. I will note the in-state updates number is much lower than it is in other states. And in talking with state board staff, my understanding is you have a pretty robust process at your DMVs for getting those address updates over to the state board and to local election officials. This is just noting that as a distinction from other ERIC states that might have a higher number here. But overall, again, across just 10 reports, and really these reports cover 21 and 22 when reports started being requested. 432,000 records is a pretty substantial number for a state your size. And I think this helps demonstrate the value of ERIC both to your state board, but also your local election officials and the integrity overall of elections in Kentucky. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I would refer you to our website as well if you're interested, or your staff to our website. I believe I know I provided committee staff with a frequently asked questions document that covers some of what I've said in more detail. as well as other materials on our website that might be useful if you'd like to have your staff grab that for you. And of course, I'm sure Karen can provide it as well. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions. And thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you, Shane. That was great. I learned a lot there, but I do have questions. But Representative Josh Branscombe is first.
Hey Shane, thank you for the presentation. Did have a couple questions really quick, and one of them you may not be able to speak to, but just curious why Alabama left. And I guess the second question is, we have a couple states around us who are not in ERIC. Are they actively looking into it or not?
Right. So first on Alabama, I think Secretary Allen has spoken as to his reasons as to why he's leaving. I think initially those reasons, he has just had some general concerns about the data that's provided to us. And we have provided information to that state and other states as to how we protect that data. But his reasons, I think, are he's articulated those a number of times in stories that have been covered. I have reached out to him and to ensure that we'd have an orderly withdrawal process. And I do hope that over time, as he learns more about ERIC from his colleagues at a national level when they convene for their conferences or as they talk to each other, that he will reconsider once he understands how the data is used and how we protect it. As for your neighbors, there are some of your border states have reached out over the years to learn more. I can't say that any of them are sort of in the pipeline to join. A couple of states just outside your border region are asking more questions about ERIC that indicate they might be interested in joining. Obviously, ERIC is much more effective when more states belong because it helps identify those cross-state movers, so you get more out of it in terms of your residents who have moved out of state. So there are some of your neighbors inquiring, but we are always talking to states and answering questions and providing information.
Thank you, Chairman.
Let me ask you this, Shane.
Sure.
When the reports are sent from you guys, who is it sent to? State Board of Elections, I'm sure. Anybody? Is it?
That is correct. Just the state board, and the reports are actually not sent. That's a good question. I'm glad you asked it that way because it allows me to highlight a really important security feature. So when states submit data to us, and when they submit it to a secure server, SFTP, which you may have heard that phrase before, only certain staff within the state board have access to that server. And they have to log in, and then our data host company knows who's logging in and can monitor that activity. And then we pick it up inside of a secure environment, our staff, and then process it. And then when we create a report, it goes back on that secure server for state board staff to retrieve. And only Kentucky State Board of Election staff have access to Kentucky's reports. No other state, no other entity. So essentially that server is it has whitelisted IP addresses, meaning that only identified, recognized computers can access it, and individuals who have the proper credentials to log in can access it.
So it is secure, and
it is secure and access is controlled.
Do you ever make public any kind of blind reports, where it wouldn't have like sensitive information but like, could somebody go to Eric or whatnot and say, this is how many, like the stuff, the info you gave here on one of these pages about how many records in Kentucky were changed and what is that on your website or anything, or what will you have to ask for that, or do you know what I'm saying?
Sure. I think so. So I'll tell you, I'll share I'll answer your question, then we can talk more if I don't quite hit the mark. So we share aggregate stats sort of at the highest level. Those are on our website. The membership right now has started sharing, and we want to start sharing sort of aggregate stats at the state level, like I just shared a slide ago for your state, the number of records by report type. And then actually the in-state duplicates report that identifies duplicate registrations, there are no protected data in that, meaning that report does not contain any data protected under federal law. and that report is public. Anyone could request and ask for that report. Additionally, under the federal regulations that protect the deceased report, the deceased data that we use, deaths that are more than 3 years old are public. Deaths that are yet less than 3 years old are not public. So the deceased reports, members may disclose deceased reports as long as they do not release records on any individual whose date of death is less than 3 years. So deceased reports are disclosable with that caveat. And that is only to comply with the federal laws that protect those data. The other ERIC reports that I talked about, the cross-state movers, the in-state updates, and the eligible but unregistered, all of those explicitly contain data from the DMV. And that data is protected under the Federal Driver's Privacy Protection Act. And that's what prohibits ERIC and its members from releasing that data unless it's released for one of the permissive exceptions in that federal law. So for example, one of those is research purposes. And ERIC as an organization has engaged in research over the years to help evaluate whether or not its reports, particularly that eligible but unregistered, is effective. And that has been done in compliance with federal law and with non-disclosure agreements to protect the confidentiality of that data and so on from time to time over our existence.
Thank you. Just a couple more quick ones. If anybody else, well, let me ask this one. You say there was no input from anybody, but as far as financial, except the states, right? And so no Zuckerberg, what was it called? Zuckerberg bucks or whatnot. None of that in there, Shane?
No, sir. No, Mr. Chairman. We have Eric's startup. We had assistance from Pew on our startup, and then the board approved a one-time grant from Pew only a few years ago to help with one-time IT infrastructure upgrades and IT-related projects. So none of our ongoing operations were supported by that grant. It has since been expended. The board approved that. We have never received grants from any other entity, nor do we want any grants from any other entity. In fact, our members are fiercely proud that we are self-funded by their dues.
And you have 32 states now. What was your peak? Did you have a peak?
34, I believe, would be the peak.
So you've lost 2 along the way.
Yeah, well, we have 33 members, and we've lost 2, but gained 2 at the same time. So the net effect, I think, is a loss of 1. And it's a little early for me to do mental math, but I think we've lost 2 states, but we're at 33 members total with DC and 32 states.
Okay. And my last question is how much does it cost for Kentucky to join ERIC?
Oh, that is a good question that I don't have the number in front of me. So there was a one-time $25,000 joining fee, and all states that pay that essentially goes into reserves to help with periodic one-time large expenditures. I don't have Kentucky's annual dues in front of me, but either Karen or I could follow up with committee staff with that information easily this morning.
Ms. Sellers.
Would that be appropriate if we could follow up? You know, we do have some mailings, and I would need to look back to see what the cost of the mailings, right, the production of the mailings. Plus, I will speak and say, I believe our dues are $40,000 a year, but I would prefer to get a firm number on that.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
Yes,
I can get
absolutely.
That to you.
Thank you. Representative Hudson.
Yes. Morning, Shane. A couple of questions for you, if you're open to difficult questions. I read recently that there is a lawsuit in 4 states alleging that ERIC was sharing data with someone, perhaps CEIR, who was a recipient of $69 million in the aforementioned Zuckerbucks. Obviously, you can't get into legal details, but how would we as a member state know that you are not sharing information with an outside entity like CEIR?
Sure. So I believe you're referring to the complaints that were filed in 4 states under the Help America Vote Act.
I think so.
And I believe 2 of those have been completed through the administrative hearings process and were dismissed. And I believe 2 are still active. To be clear, the only way to know, so this is an interesting question because the board just discussed this. So there are a number of assessments that we could complete by an independent bodies that would show we are following our policies and procedures for data handling, that our systems are secure and not vulnerable, and so on, including even auditing our logs. There's no way to prove 100% that somehow nefariously we did not pull the data off and in some other method provide it to someone. That's a negative that we can't prove. But we all ERIC staff, all 3 of us, there are only 3 of us, and I do not actually have access to the data. The system engineers and the data specialists have access to the data. All of us sign off on affirmations that we will follow ERIC's security policies and procedures, including not releasing the data and following ERIC's confidentiality requirements. And of course, the penalty for violating those is losing our job and losing our professional reputation and integrity. ERIC staff have not shared data with any outside entity. Again, when I was referring to research earlier, some ERIC member states chose on their own to engage in research with CEIR in the past at their choosing, without any pressure or suggestion from ERIC as an organization or from me as its executive director. And I believe that that sharing of that data was in compliance with federal law that protects those data. And it was in compliance with the membership agreement because of the purposes of it.
Okay. Well, thank you. A couple more questions, if I could. Referring to your slide that talked about eligible but unregistered voters, does ERIC actually make contacts with those people, or does the state board, or do both make contact with those voters?
Only our members. So in your case, it's the state board. ERIC does not.
Okay. Now, I saw on one of the slides here that the chief election officer appoints our member of ERIC, and I'm recently become confused about who that is. Is that Secretary of State chief elections officer, or is that
Yes,
you?
sir. He
Okay.
is the chief
Okay, so he
election
appointed
official
you
for
to that
Kentucky.
position.
Yes, sir.
Does he have, he is the chief elections officer, does he have access to the ERIC data?
No, sir. That's, as Shane mentioned, the data goes to our a secure server. State Board of Elections, they can monitor who in the State Board of Elections would have access to that data. It's extremely secure. So that's to protect, of course, the registered voters.
So does anyone in that Secretary of State office have access to the ERIC data?
Not to my knowledge. No.
Okay, thank you. Also, the list maintenance reports. Your recommendation was that ERIC's recommendation was that every member pull these reports at least once a year, but not less than every 425 days. It looks like in a 4-year span there, Kentucky has only pulled 2 of those reports. Any reason why?
Well, are you addressing Executive Director Sellers?
Either Shane or Karen, either one. So,
Karen, before you respond, I'll just say that 425-day requirement to me as the executive director is not good enough. Let me put it that way. I believe the requirements should be higher. And that change was made when I was on a break from elections. I used to be I was part of creating ERIC. I was the first chair of ERIC. I was very involved. I took a few years off and I came back, and that change had been implemented to accommodate a few states' challenges in using ERIC. I believe states should be required to use reports more frequently. I think Karen can speak to why they've only done 2, but I can say they are in compliance. They actually even exceed that requirement. If I was to put up the schedule of when those reports were requested, 2019 is when they joined. I think it took a little while to get them fully on board. I don't remember how many months. So So I know that looks like a 3-year period. It might actually have been only 2 years or so that they were fully operational, or 2.5 years that they were fully operational and able to take reports. So I'm happy to pass it back to Karen, but I just want to be clear, they are in compliance. I think the 425 days is not good enough.
Thank you, Shane. Yes, that was what I was going to add. It did take a little bit of time after the membership agreement was signed for our staff to be prepared to accept the reports. And I appreciate that Shane said, yes, we are in total compliance with that.
So we joined in 2019, is that correct? And what were the circumstances of Kentucky joining ERIC? What drove that?
Was the Taylor isn't here. I'm sorry, he's out of town, but we do have a consent decree that requires the state of Kentucky to be a member of ERIC through 2025.
2025.
Yes.
Representative Decker.
Yes, thank you all for your report and for the presenter on Zoom. Really appreciated that. A couple of things I want to clarify. I think John said, so the Secretary of State hired you, and I just want to clear that up. The Secretary of State did not hire you. The board hires you. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes,
thank you.
the State Board of Elections.
Yes, thank you. And then I do have a question about the whole theory that there's left-wing money in ERIC. The theory is really not Zuckerbucks, it's Soros. And so can you address that? Anyone?
Sure. There's no Soros funding in ERIC.
But he
Period.
did have a role in the founding of ERIC, is that right?
No, he did
And that
not.
he gave a donation to the Pew Trust?
He gave a donation to the Pew Trust, and that those funds were used for a different elections
Okay.
program called the Voting Information Project, which is another project that Pew started that is no longer housed at Pew. And those records have been published.
Yes.
It is, I can just say unequivocally, no Soros funding involved in ERIC at any point.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hamlin. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee.
Thank you, Shane.
And we're not done yet, are we? So, Karen, go ahead and talk about your next subject.
I am going to turn that over to Mr. House, Assistant Director. He was really the leader in our risk limiting audit. Also online is Jennifer Morrell. She had been present before a committee here in the last few months to speak about our risk limiting audit, but I'll turn it back over to Mr. House and let him discuss the results.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for your opportunity today to appear today to talk about the Commonwealth's first risk limiting audit pilot program. In 2021, the legislature placed language in House Bill 574 for this type of audit to be tested in Kentucky. However, in 2021, we didn't have elections. So discussions began, and along the way, the early strategies and planning sessions occurred. In the start of 2022, the State Board of Elections continued discussions with Ms. Morrell, who is with us today. Ms. Morrell is known throughout the election world as a subject matter expert in the area of audits, particularly in RLAs, as they are often referred to. With her help and more guidance from the General Assembly in House Bill 564, we moved forward with the establishment of milestones and a path to completing the mandates of the pilot program. Our first task was to put together a working group to educate ourselves about this type of audit and how it could work in Kentucky. Joining the team, we had, of course, Ms. Morrell, 6 county clerks and their staffs who were chosen on the basis of population, and also half of the 6 would be using one of the 2 certified vendors, and the other would use the other system and that is certified in Kentucky. We also had members of the Secretary of State Adams' office, representatives of the Election Systems and Software, HARP Enterprises, Inc., representing Hart InterCivic, the 2 certified voting machine systems that are allowed in Kentucky. And rounding out the group, Trey Grayson, who is the election expert in his own right. With a diverse group formed, SBE led the project forward, developing the concepts that we believed to be worked in Kentucky. Our group decided that the best RLA model for the state was ballot polling. And if you look on your handouts that you have, page 6 kind of starts to get into that a little bit more. Because of the processes the clerk's offices have and how they run their elections, that system seemed that type of RLA seemed to be the right fit for Kentucky. As the plan to launch the pilot in Fayette County, Kenton, Henderson, Madison, Johnson, and Anderson, shortly after the November general election, final preparations for the counties were made. The most important part, putting together each of these counties' ballot manifests, which is also addressed on page 8 of the handout. These are lists of every scanner in each county during the election, along with the locations and types of the scanners. And then after the election, the numbers would be added to that manifest of how many votes were in each of those scanning machines. Once we had this, SBE began testing the RLA spreadsheet tool developed by Ms. Morell's team. The tool was designed to help us in 3 ways. It would determine the acceptable sample size to be pulled for examined ballots. It would produce a random sampling of ballots that we needed to pull, and it would compare the margin of victory for the certified winners in the elections to the margin of victory produced by the sample size that we polled. We were ready to go in December, and then Fayette County held their elections in November, and which ended in 2 recount contests. This put us on hold for a bit and had us change our plans slightly. Instead of performing the RLA in December, all 6 counties decided that the pilot would be beneficial if we isolated Fayette County separate and combined the other 5 counties. So we, in essence, did 2 RLA projects. So to get started, after the recounts were clear and Taylor gave us the clear, all go ahead, our State Board of Elections members met on Tuesday, January 17th to perform a public dice roll to get a 15-digit seed that we could plug into that RLA tool. That was actually a fun day for our board members since they got to roll the dice, and we had a little gaming going on in the boardroom, so that was a little bit different. Once we did that, the ballot manifest lists were inserted into the program along with that seed number and along with the candidates' vote counts, the ballots that were cast in every county, and that gave us what we needed to start the RLA project. So on Thursday, January 19th, our staff, along with Ms. Morell, a colleague, deployed to each of the 6 counties to monitor and assist with the pilot project. And we all thought, due to the amount of ballots we had to pull, which was 466 from Fayette County and 607 from the other 5 counties, that everything would be pretty quick and smooth. However, as it was a pilot and a learning experience, we found out that organizing the ballots from each machine with a small number of people was quite a challenge. Nonetheless, the counties moved forward and completed the process with some working modifications. Each county took their generated lists of ballots to be pulled from their machines and started working in pairs of 2, which would be a Republican and Democrat in a normal setting. Participants organized ballots from the still locked and in all cases but in Fayette County, sealed voting machines. Once organized, they began counting into stacks and retrieving the randomly selected ballots. After this process was completed, the ballots were pulled, would be hand counted and tallied again by pairs of 2 people. These results then would be sent to the state board to be checked against the certified results from the election, as well as the results from entering the information into the RLA spreadsheet tool. And the moment that we have all been waiting for, all the RLA pilot in both Fayette and the 5 combining counties showed a similar margin of victory for the winner. In Fayette, the certified results, which you can tell on page 12 in your packets, showed that Booker having 59.81% to Paul's 39%, almost matched perfectly with the RLA sample showed Booker having 59.4% and Paul's 39.14%. The other counties' combined totals, Paul received 61.6% to 37.2% in the certified results. The RLA results showed 60% for Paul and 38% for Booker. Being a pilot in our first running of the results were very encouraging. In summation, we learned a great deal from the development and implementation of this pilot program. This process appears to have merit based on the results alone. There are operational tasks that we would need to be worked out along other issues that require further examination and discussion. SBE would at least like to recommend an expanded pilot program with more counties to see what can be improved and to get more cost and time analysis. With that, again, thank you for this opportunity, and to participants of the pilot, we appreciate your time and work on behalf of the Commonwealth. So we had a good pilot, and we are appreciative of everyone that assisted on that. And Ms. Morrell could add some comments to that if she'd like.
Yes, ma'am. Please.
I really don't have much to add. Richard did a phenomenal job there, and I'm just honored that I got to participate with them. I think the way that they went about this was stellar, taking their time to make sure everybody had a full understanding of how RLAs work, the requirements in terms of ballot accounting, organization, storage. We spent a lot of time working through that, and that's absolutely the way that you want to conduct your initial pilot project. So I'm really just here to answer any questions that Richard isn't able to answer. He's now also an audit expert, having spent a lot of time over the last year thinking and reading about this.
Representative Hodgson.
Yes, I got a question for you. House Bill 574 had permissive language in it to allow us to conduct RLAs. Was there any prescriptive language that told you exactly how to do that, or is that codified in a regulation somewhere, or did the working group just come up with this protocol themselves?
Well, 574 gave the guidance, I think 5% of the county should participate, and that the report should be made public.
Okay.
Other than that, the working group developed the whole process and implementation.
Okay, so in 574, there's no methodology specified for how to do an RLA?
That I'm aware of.
Okay. My understanding of RLAs from other states is a lot of states use serialized ballots, and that's how they select their random ballots. Since our ballots are not serialized, how did you do that?
We used the ballot polling process, which was just randomization. It wasn't anything selected. It wasn't meant that you're talking about using the cast vote records. Kentucky's machines, they do have that ability the more they transition to the newer machines, but that would be a more costly process as far as having to change that and update those voting equipment to do that. And the clerks have not done that yet using that cast ballot vote record. That is something we could examine in the future, but the way, and I believe Ms. Morrell can correct me, the reason why the group did not go with it is because, one, we don't use that currently, and two, we don't have much experience with that, and there was another reason, and I'm blank right now.
I'm happy to take it from here, Richard. So there are three main methods for conducting risk limiting audits. And the method that you're referring to, ballot comparison method, works great in states where ballots are centrally scanned. So that normally is states where you see a predominance of mail ballots or ballots being brought back from voting locations and scanned in an operations facility. And that allows a couple of things. It allows, as you mentioned, the imprinting. It allows you to then take that and compare that directly to the cast vote record. And I would say for states that are have either made risk limiting audits a requirement or are piloting, that's actually not the norm. So most states that, again, Colorado and some of the other Western states that centrally scan can do that direct comparison, a ballot to a cast vote record. Most are doing what you all just did in Kentucky, ballot polling, where we take a random sample and we hand tally that sample, and we're looking for a similar result to what was officially reported. Other states are using what we call batch comparisons. We may take all the ballots in a single container or batch, hand tally those, and compare those to subtotals from the voting system. The other thing that I would flag there when we talk about putting a unique number on a ballot, and why that's not being done in many states is because most states scan ballots at the precinct level, right? If you're not scanning in a central facility, but you're scanning them right there where a voter votes, putting a serialized number risks risks voter exposing how a voter voted. So voter secrecy, voter anonymity, then is subject to that. That's a problem. And so we have not. I don't know of any state that's doing that, putting a serialized number when they're scanning ballots at a polling location.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yes, thank
or
you. I was not advocating for either the central counting house or the serialized ballots for those reasons. I just wanted to know how we did our random selection. But you did mention the batch RLA method. So if we were to say take one scanner, one ballot counter at a precinct, and do that batch method and count that entire scanner's ballots, 300, 500, 600 ballots, and compare that to the tally, that would be a valid method of performing an RLA.
It would be a valid method, and for a lot of states, that's become the preferred method. It's fairly intuitive. Election administrators understand how to do that. It's very similar to recount requirements. It's a little bit easier to explain to the public because you're taking totals from that hand count and you're comparing them directly to something coming out of the voting system. It's really tough, though, when you have early voting, because if it's just 3 or 4 or 5 or 600 ballots in a batch, that's not tough to sit and hand count those. But when a single batch or a single container contains ballots for the whole early voting period, you potentially have thousands of ballots. And so there, because we randomly select those, right, there is a chance or a probability that early voting batch, that batch with thousands of ballots, may be the one that's selected. Again, I know of a state that decided they still wanted to move forward with it and take that risk. And for most of their counties, they ended up with normal sized batches. And they had one county that drew the short straw and had to count almost 10,000 ballots were in that particular batch. So there are trade-offs in terms of the number of ballots that you're required to retrieve and tally. There are trade-offs for all three methods. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. Well, I certainly thank you for that explanation. I certainly prefer the batch method, and we've discussed that with some proposed legislation as being easier to understand by the public and easier to execute by the county clerks. And we'll get into that a bit this summer. I was wondering if you have an estimate from our state or other states about how many ballots you can recount in an hour. I've heard numbers of recounts in courtroom settings of about 300 an hour for a single race. I'm wondering if that number is
I will
reasonable.
say with this RLA, we learned that the problem isn't the actually counting them or tallying them. It's the organization. And you have a picture in your packet there of what all of the voting machines look like when they come to back to the clerk's office. So that would be the big issue of organization of those ballots. Yeah, you can see I saw you shrug at that. Yes, it was our biggest obstacle in this RLA, and it was the most time-consuming. For instance, in Karen went to Johnson County and only had to pull 25 ballots from a few machines, but it took 2 hours to do that. In Henderson County, we went and pulled 72 ballots in about 3.5 hours out of about 20 machines. So it was very time-consuming. And in the larger counties, it was a big part. I know that we've got Jason Denny here who's participated in it too. He could probably attest to that too, that same fact.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Decker.
Yes, on that point, I have been kind of worried about that with the evolution of vote centers, if there's a recount, et cetera. Do you have any suggestion for making that easier to find?
For a recount on a vote
Well, just to get into the box and organize. Is there any suggestion for that? How when you have to find a ballot?
You could put in those machines there, they do make these little tubs that catch ballots and can organize them a little bit better. The problem with that is the first ballot that drops in the machine, if somebody got creative at some point in time in life, maybe you could decide how that person's ballot was. That was always the part of that, is trying to keep the voter secrecy. We struggled with that in the pilot program and discussing different methods and things. as far as how to keep that ballot secrecy. I know that Jason's trying to figure out a way to create some kind of jiggler that makes them flow into a good path or something. But we're certainly looking at that, because that was the biggest part of the RLAs. That was the most tasking.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, anybody else? Well, I think it was good information today. Thank you, Karen Sellers and Richard and Miss Morrell. Thank you for being here. Is there anything else for this great bunch in front of us? Okay, do I hear a motion to adjourn? We're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.